Welcome to the Stokes Flame Podcast. The first edition of the Stokes Flame Podcast is being brought to you today on behalf of an organization that is really close to my heart, the Cancer Advocacy Group of Louisiana. Formed in 2019 and really just finalized in 2020, the Cancer Advocacy Group of Louisiana is a corporation organized and operated to advocate for legislation and administrative regulations in the state of Louisiana to promote, support, and facilitate cancer research and education, as well as the well-being and care of cancer patients, survivors, and their families. Our coalition will engage with state lawmakers and the public to bring awareness to the need for continued governmental, financial, and other support to assist in finding a cure for cancer and mitigate the suffering and the financial hardship of those that are afflicted by this terrible disease. Please visit us on www.cag-la.org and like us on social media. I'm your host, Julie Stokes, and today we will be talking to Dr. Marc Matrana. Dr. Matrana is a ninth-generation native New Orleanian. He's a practicing board-certified medical oncologist who serves as the director of Ochsner's Precision Cancer Therapies program. It's the only dedicated early phase clinical trials program for cancer patients between Houston and Birmingham. He's a recipient of numerous awards. He's the Young Alumnus for Tulane University School of Science and Engineering, New Physician of the Year at Ochsner, and the Ochsner Spirit of Leadership Philanthropy Partner of the Year Award. He's been one of Gambit's 40 Under 40, a miracle maker with the Moonlight and Miracles Gala, selected as a bow for the 2019 American Cancer Bells and Bows Ball, which I was the honorary chair of. He was also named as a City Business Healthcare Hero just this year. He's raised several millions of dollars in cancer research and regularly volunteers his time and talent to benefit the cancer patients of Louisiana. So welcome. We really appreciate you being here with us, Dr. Matrana.
Thank you so much. It's truly an honor, Julie. I really appreciate the opportunity.
We're really excited to have you, and so glad that you've decided to choose New Orleans area as your home, both to raise your family and to practice, and that what you're practicing to me in the field of medicine is so promising and important. I want to ask you just to tell us a little bit about precision medicine.
Absolutely. So, the field of oncology is moving really, really fast. And even just in the last few years, we can see great improvements in outcomes in patients. But really in the next forefront is precision medicine. And what precision medicine is essentially using genetic and genomic technologies to pair patients with the best, most effective therapies. And we're really just scratching the surface of the opportunities here. For example, what we do is we can do some very sophisticated genetic sequencing on patients' tumor samples. We're looking at the tumor's genetics, not just the patient's own genetics, and we're finding out what drives the tumor at the molecular level, and then we're going after it with drugs that we know target that specific problem.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really exciting because as somebody who went through chemotherapy, it's not a walk in the park. I think it scares the heck out of a lot of people just to hear the word. I've been through two different kinds, and I know that it can be not so bad. And just when you think it's not so bad, it comes around too, and your mind is blown by how bad it can be. So when people like me hear about the possibility of something that goes in and zeroes in on the genomic information, instead of a bath of chemicals, that sounds really exciting.
Yeah, and it definitely has its place. As I said, it's evolving more and more week by week, month by month, year by year, and it's not going to be for every patient. In fact, a lot of these mutation drug pairs are real needles in a haystack. But when we do find them, they can benefit cancer patients greatly. But just like you said, less side effects than the traditional therapies, much more effective than the traditional therapies. And so when we find those needles in a haystack, we want to do everything in our power to get those patients on those drugs that we know have really high chance of success.
Which brings me to our second point, which was legislation that it was the first legislation that was pursued by the cancer advocacy group. We just had it signed by the governor last week. It was very exciting. We came together as a cancer advocacy group, like I said earlier this year. It's a group of 5 of us. One of the first things that we did was to interview Dr. Matrana about ideas that he might have for legislation, since this field of medicine is such an up and coming and exciting branch of medicine that can give us cures that might have a lot less side effects and a lot higher efficacy rate. So I'm going to let you, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit
Sure.
about the legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so proud that we were able to work with you all on this and to be successful, especially in the cancer advocacy group's first big push for a new. Basically, what the law does is it mandates insurance companies to pay for drugs, not necessarily based on the type of tumor a patient has or the location of the tumor, but on the underlying genetics and genomics of the tumor. And so I'll give you an example. In lung cancer, we know that if a patient has an advanced lung cancer and harbors an ALK mutation, ALK mutation, that there are certain drugs, such as crizotinib, which work extremely well with far fewer side effects than chemotherapy on average. And so it is a standard of care to use that drug, crizotinib, for those patients with those ALK mutations. Often, we will find those same mutations in other cancers. And in some cases, patients have run out of other options. And we would like, physicians want to try those targeted drugs, not based on type of cancer the patient has, but based on the underlying mutation. And this legislation basically mandates the insurance company to pay for those targeted therapies in those cases when there's scientific evidence to back it up, when there's an approved therapy for that mutation, but maybe it's approved in a different type of cancer. It allows patients and doctors the right to try these potentially life-saving drugs in those cases.
Yeah. It was really, it's always interesting to file a bill, because you come up with the best wording you can come up with, and then you put it out there. And the minute that it publishes, which I want to thank our author, Senator Kirk Talbot, who did an amazing job of moving it through the system, and also thank House Representative Jeremy Lacombe, who the cancer fight and the philanthropy efforts in cancer are very near and dear to his heart, and he helped us a great deal to get it through the system too. But one of the things that always happens is that right when you file it, people come out of the woodworks saying this is a problem, that's a problem, and we were really able to successfully address a lot of the problems. And really what happens here when you look at new science and new treatments is that it takes a bit for health insurance to catch up with that. They don't always even realize what's happening behind the scenes, and they need help to understand, look, we're missing an opportunity here and there to help patients. So part of that, when you author a legislation like this, part of that process is to work with the health insurance companies. And I've got to say that I was really happy with the way Blue Cross Blue Shield and some of the other health plans really worked with us to fine tune the wording and make it all possible. So that was really exciting. So I'm just so glad that it's there.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And it was a little surprising to me how collaborative the insurance industry really was at the end of this process. I was very happy with it because I think both sides were satisfied with what we got, and we were able to really work with them, like you said, to calm any potential concerns over the legislation. At the end of the day, I really do think that this law will save money because when you get patients on the right therapy, the most effective therapy, they're not going to be admitted to the hospital with the symptoms of harsher therapies or with symptoms from progressive disease. Hopefully, they're going to be out in society living productive lives and raising tax, paying taxes.
Yeah, that's right. And
Yeah,
I mean, I can think of just when I went through chemo, the second round, that was so hard.
yeah.
They had to do a new Elasta shot every time I had that done. So they were wanting
Hmm.
$25,000. I couldn't even
Right.
believe when I found out how expensive that was. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's some of the examples of things that might not even be necessary,
Right. Right.
with some of the therapies that you're talking about.
Exactly.
Another part, we started out with two bills and it ended up morphing into one. The
Yeah.
other bill allowed for phase 1 trials to be treated differently than they're treated. And that got confusing in the beginning because we
Mhm.
weren't asking the insurance companies to cover the drugs because the
Right.
drug companies already provide the drugs for
Right.
free, basically, because they're testing them. So what
Mhm.
did that bill do, or that piece of the bill do, that we
Yeah.
wanted to treat phase 1 trials fairly?
Exactly. So there was already a wonderful law on the books, which basically stated that if a patient with advanced cancer wants to enroll on a phase 2 through 4 clinical trial, that the insurance company would cover costs that are not covered by the trial itself. And essentially what it functioned to do is allow patients access to trials, because the insurance company couldn't come back and say, look, we're not going to pay for your routine standard of care because you're on a trial. Some states, that's the case. It's talked to doctors in other states, and about half of their patients don't have access to trials simply because the insurance companies, refuse to allow them on trials. So they refuse to pay for any of their care whatsoever when they're on trials. This law protects our patients for that. But when it was written, there really weren't many phase 1 trials in the state of Louisiana. Our program didn't exist. And the trials which were run here were the phase 2 through 4. And that's what the law focused on. So our amendment to that law really just adds phase 1 to that. It allows phase 1 patients to access to the trials, and particularly protects them from an insurance company coming in and saying, look, because you signed on the trial, we're no longer going to cover any portion of your health care. It prevents discrimination against patients, particularly advanced cancer patients who want to participate in a clinical trial. And often, patients will come to me and they'll say, well, is the clinical trial, is that really the best thing for me? And what I always tell people is, patients who are in the know, my physician patients, my nurse patients, high net worth patients, they're always looking for clinical trials, and they will go to the ends of the earth, literally, to get on clinical trials. I had one doctor nurse couple who went to Germany to get on a trial because there were no trials for the wife in the United States. But they know that outcomes on trials tend to be better. Patients get access to the latest, greatest technology. They get watched a little more carefully because they're on a clinical trial. They really want to do clinical trials. I find that less educated patients, maybe patients that are not quite in the know, tend to be scared of clinical trials. They don't want to be guinea pigs, and that's not what we're talking about at all here. We're talking about things that ultimately are going to benefit the patient in the great majority of cases. And so our amendment to the current law simply expands on that and allows patients the opportunity and really the choice if they want to participate in a trial or not.
Well, and I think that there was one piece of what you said, but it was their ordinary, normal medical care.
Right.
Because, and I didn't understand at first myself either, that what
Mhm.
was happening there is that, like, let's just say you're supposed to have, I don't know, a mammogram or a
Right.
colonoscopy every
Right.
single year.
Hmm.
And because you were on a clinical trial, they could say, oh, well, we're not going to cover any of your tests, even the
Right.
things that would have happened anyway. And that's just,
Exactly.
those are the things that our legislation was seeking to make sure that they would be covered. Um,
Right. Right.
yeah.
And in no way would we ever, suggest that the insurance company cover the cost of an experimental phase 1 drug. And the manufacturers are going to pay for that. I don't even know how you would. It's not a commercial drug. How you would even bill an insurance company for something like that.
Right, right, right. Um, so I guess, moving on or back, I guess, a little
Mhm.
bit to precision medicine. It's kind of a broad question, but
Yeah.
what excites you the most as a scientist, as a
Mm.
doctor, about the future of oncology with all of this coming up?
Gosh, it has been a whirlwind few years for oncology with the advent of immunotherapy, the rise of these target therapies and precision medicine, and just see that roller coaster just continuing to snowball. I'll give you an example. When I was in training 7 years ago, and a patient would walk in through the door with metastatic melanoma with brain mets, we usually gave that patient about 3 months, on average, about 3 months to live. About half of them made it that long, and half of them didn't. It would have been considered a miracle to make it to a year for those patients. Today, 7 years later, those same patients, when they walk through the door, on average, they live at least 5 years or more. And honestly, we don't know how long they live because when our immunotherapies came out in this area about 5 years ago or so, more than half those patients who received the therapies at that time are still alive. So we don't even know what the average survival is because people are living. Many of those patients are now living off therapy with no evidence of disease. We don't like to use that C word, cure. We don't like to use that, but essentially, for all intents and purposes, many of these patients are being cured now. And it's just a complete change from where we were a few years ago. We're seeing that more and more in other cancers. At the same time, we know we've still got a really long way to go. We've got a really long way to go. Every year, we inch towards the goal of no cancer, but a long way to go. What excites me most, I think, are just the number of therapies coming out these days, and how these therapies are really based on underlying drivers of the cancer, what's really causing it at the molecular level. And we're getting smarter and smarter about drug design. We're getting smarter and smarter about the biology almost day by day. And so, each year when we do our big meetings, our big ASCO in Chicago, which was virtual this year with COVID, of course, and our AACR meeting, American Cancer Research Association, it's just amazing to see all the breakthroughs that just continue to happen. And so it's a really exciting field to be in. It's the fastest moving field in medicine by far. And to be a part of it, it's just an exciting career. No doubt about it.
I mean, how long has it been around in any sort of robust fashion?
Precision medicine.
Yeah.
The first drugs that came out, well, probably were Herceptin for breast cancer, for the
Hmm.
mutated breast cancers, and then lung has kind of led the way with various drugs that target mutations. But you're probably looking in the scale of a decade or a little more, where we first started seeing the new drugs. For quite a few years, we were talking about enough drugs that you could
Well,
count on a single hand.
from what you're saying, it makes me wonder, what's the potential to eventually find some sort of a cure for cancer? This beast that we've been trying to eradicate now for hundreds of years.
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I think about my hope for the field of oncology, I hope that one day every cancer center in America looks like the old TB hospital downtown in downtown New Orleans. It's crumbling, vines growing through it. It's been absolutely abandoned. I hope every cancer center in the world looks like that one day. That said, we've still got a long way to get there. And the problem is that cancer is not just one disease or even a dozen diseases. It's probably thousands of diseases. And really, precision medicine is defining that, because we're learning, for example, that lung cancer that we thought was just lung cancer a decade ago really isn't. It's dozens of different diseases, each driven by different mutations and molecular drivers. And so as we get better and better with the genetics, we're learning how complex this beast really is. I hope that in my lifetime we'll see the cure, although I don't know. I certainly hope that by the time my son and my grandchildren one day are adults, maybe we'll be there. but we still have a long way to go.
Well, I know that's a lot of us that are in this fight and have fought it on our own. It seems like every day I find out about somebody new that's been afflicted with cancer, and every day I think, how many more lives? So I really commend you and the important work that you're doing. And I'm so glad that you, after growing up here and going to Tulane, which my son is about to do, hopefully in person in a couple of months.
Yes.
I'm really glad that you decided to call New Orleans home and that you're doing this important work right here where the need is so massive. We're about out of time right now, but I just want to thank you for being here, for sharing a little bit of your day with us to learn more about precision medicine and its effect on the future of oncology. Thank you for your idea on that important piece of legislation. And thank you to my partners in the cancer advocacy group. That's Chad Landry, whose idea it was to start it in the first place. Also Rich Mowdy and Karen Stahl and Ashish Udrain, Dr. Udrain. It's meant a lot to me to be part of this journey. And I think that in the course of our work together, I hope to save many lives and hope to help many people with this dreaded disease. Thank you to all of us that have been watching this video cast. And it's been brought to you by Flame Consulting and by the Cancer Advocacy Group of Louisiana. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie.